Hello. In this video, I'm going to try and explain everything that you need to know about the Moog Messenger. I'll introduce the Messenger and what it's for and what it does well. I'll talk about all of the various features and I'll explain all of the sort of not obvious things about how the sequencer works and the arpeggiator, all of these kind of secondary functions, including advanced modulation that you can do. And above all, I'm going to try not to assume any knowledge on your part here because I recognize that this might be your first synthesizer. This tutorial is sponsored by my great friends at Moog. And I've actually been able to speak to the Moogicians behind the scenes, people actually responsible for the design of Messenger. So I have some insight that I can bring to bear if you're thinking about this synth or if you have this synth and you want to make sure you get the most from it. Because it can do a lot and it's not all obvious at the first glance. A very quick tour of Messenger. In this section, I'm just going to say all of the things that are in the Messenger really quickly for those who understand synths and just want like a whistle-stop tour. But in the rest of the video, I will go into all of these things in more depth. So if you don't understand what I'm talking about, keep watching. So the Messenger is a monophonic analog synthesizer with a bunch of digital control built into the knobs. That means that it can save and recall presets, but it also means you can send and receive MIDI CCs to the controls. Of course, it's still an analog synth at its heart. It just has a digital control layer. And in terms of the voicing, we have two analog oscillators, interestingly with variable wave shape that includes wave folding as a component. There is a sub-octave generator, which is 1 octave below VCO1, and it also, interestingly, has a variable wave shape, something you don't find on other synths. We have a mixer section, which is not based on the CP3, but just blends everything cleanly. We have a filter section with a bunch of different modes, including 4-pole, 2-pole, bandpass, and high-pass. There is a feedback and external input control. I would be remiss not to point out the res bass feature. What this does is it mixes bass back into the output when you turn up resonance. More on that in a sec. There are two envelopes, which can be very snappy or quite long and can loop. There are two LFOs, one here which we can send to a bunch of distant destinations and has variable wave shapes, triangle, saws, square. But there is a second triangle wave LFO in the left-hand controller section here, which we can send to pitch cutoff and amp. There's also glide, a tempo knob, and there's a tempo knob because there is a sequencer and arpeggiator built in. These are more than your traditional sequencers and arpeggiators because of a few clever features. The sequencer is 64 steps and we can do the thing of hitting record and playing in notes that we want. But we also have note probability in the note pool where we can make certain notes be randomly changed based on a pool of notes that we determine. We can make notes have a probability of whether they're going to get triggered or not. And in the case of the arpeggiator, there are a bunch of patterns and a bunch of different oct modes which play the ARP in really interesting different ways. Actually, I think the ARP is really more like a sequencer. You can also do this amazing thing where you can actually turn notes on and off to create different ARP patterns. And also, there is some hidden stuff. For example, we can actually send a bunch of the modulation sources to one other destination. By holding down, for example, LFO1 assign, I can now assign LFO1 to one more thing in the Messenger. And that's true of a bunch of other things in the synth too. We also have this thing called KBS&H, which is a random voltage that is triggered every time you play a note, and you can assign that to one other thing. And also in the sequencer, you have what's called parameter locking, where on each step, you can put one change to one thing. So actually, there's a lot of little secrety things and clever stuff. And round the back, by the way, you have full in MIDI in and out. You also have USB-C for MIDI. You have CV ins, CV outs to send the keyboard to other things, to send voltages to it, to play it with an external sequencer, or to clock from or to it. You also have expression and sustain inputs, and you can map the expression control to one value in the synth. And there's an external in, so that you can mix other stuff into it. But wavefolding is a decidedly non-Moog feature historically. So its presence here is more like Buchla synthesizers than it is like Moog synthesizers. I'd like to also single out note probability, the note pool, as well as the design of the arpeggiator. And what I smell here is the presence of someone at Moog who is a performer and is actually using synthesizers to play live. Because these are things that are, I would say, quite heady, grown-up things to have in a product like this. It's someone who's clearly been messing with everything and it's like, I know it will be just a great taste of some of the quirkier and weird worlds of sequencing. I think it's quite successful, the implementation in here, and I'll show you it later. Gosh, that was quick, wasn't it? Let's actually get into what all of those things are. How to load, browse, and edit presets. So there are 16 banks of 16 presets in the Messenger. The first 15 banks are full of sounds, but the 16th is blank. So the way that we choose a sound is we first have to choose one of the 16 banks, and then we choose one of the 16 patches. We do this by pushing the bank button, and now we're going to choose which of the 16 banks I want. Let's have one. And then it automatically shifts over to patch. Patch is the name of one of the 16 sounds. And if I push one, oof. We hear sound 1 in bank 1. If you start interacting with any of the dials, you'll hear that sound start to change. Ooh. Oh my mate. So back to bank 1, patch 2. And you can just push these and play. You tweak sounds, and if you like something, you can push the save button. And then what it's going to do is wink at you and say, where in the 16 slots do you want to save it to? It's winking on number 7 to say, this is the location you are at currently. And it might be that I think, I really want to save it in 16. But what's in 16? Well, you can find out if you hold it down. Let go. Did you hear what happened? Let's hold 15. This white noise thing. Tell you what, let's save it there. So now I've saved it into 15, and in order to preview what was in the slot, I held that button down. And while I was holding it down, it lets you hear the sound that's in that slot, and if you like it, you can hit save to save it. One quick thing is if you just want to make a sound and start from an init patch, which is the name for a sort of buzzy sound that it, is a starting point, you'd hold down this button that says panel. Hold it down, and that creates the init patch. So let's make some sounds. How does the voice work? So voice refers to the parts of the messenger that actually make sound. The oscillators into the mixer and then into a filter. Messenger is a subtractive synth, and that's so named because it takes a bright and complicated sound made by oscillators, mixes it together, and then you subtract parts of it with a filter. And then all the other parts, the envelopes and LFOs, are really just ways of controlling those parts that make sound, the oscillators and the filter and the output volume. So let's make a sound. If I hold the panel button for a second or two, it winks, and we are presented with the greatest sound ever made. I'll push the keyboard octave to go down. A bassy buzz. And so the way that we would make a sound is we have to mix together some oscillators. And so I'll turn all the mixer settings down except oscillator 1. That's what we're hearing. And if I change the tuning dial, I can change the pitch. And if I change the wave shape, I get the full scope of tone that a messenger oscillator can make. The Waveshape dial is quite cleverly designed in that if you have it in the middle, it's a saw wave. If you move it to the right, it's a square wave. And if you sweep it from that point to the end of the travel clockwise, you get what's called pulse width modulation. That's where the square wave's width is being expanded and contracted, but the pitch stays the same. It creates this wonderful movement. And we'll see in a second we can use an LFO or an envelope to move that for us. But the really unique thing about the messenger is what happens when you do the opposite thing in the other direction. So if we go here, we get like a triangle wave. But if we go fully anti-clockwise, we get this sound that is decidedly un-Moog. Now what this is a thing called a wave folder. What a wave folder does is it takes a triangle wave and quite literally folds it over into itself many times, like you're folding a piece of paper. And it's really not very Moog. It's actually very West Coast, which is to say quite Buchla-ish in its thematic link. Buchla synths tended to have wave folders and FM between the oscillators. And guess what? That's what you've got here, as well as a filter. So this is a really significant difference. It's one of the key things about Messenger. And the fact is, both oscillators, 1 and 2, have the same wave shaping capability. So we've 2 oscillators, each which can be folded. And so we get 2 oscillators by turning up the sound of oscillator 2. And then we can have independent choices of sound for each one. Ooh. So 1 is doing this, while 2 is doing that. Blend them together. And you just get like a huge sound when you combine 2 oscillators together. You can imagine when you modulate these wave shapes, good things start to happen. And we can also change the tuning of 2 like this. Lovely. And so if that wasn't fat enough, there is a third thing here called sub-oscillator. And what a sub-oscillator is it's another oscillator that is 1 octave below oscillator 1. So that's oscillator 1. Fade it in and you've got this extra low end. What is really significantly different on the Messenger to any other synth, it's very uncommon to have this. This is the ability to vary what the waveform of the sub is. And we've got a square wave with pulse width modulation or a triangle. And you might want to use the triangle just to add like subtle bass that it's just there but isn't so obvious sonically. But you can brighten it up by moving it into the square wave territory and then animate it. That is super unusual. You don't tend to find that you've got a freely variable sub-octave generator waveform, or definitely not with PWM. Important to note that the sub-octave generator is always tied, by the way, to oscillator 1. So if we hear the sub-octave generator by itself, if we sweep VCO1's pitch, it changes too. The two are locked. There is noise. Definitely sounds like noise, all right. That's white noise, and it's very useful for adding kind of texture to sounds. And is a useful component. For example, you could do things like sequence it so that the noise is off, but it's on a single step, and that would create a kind of snare sound, which we'll get to later. What is FM? FM allows us to get a whole other range of timbres out of the synth. Yeah, yes. So what FM is doing is oscillator 1 is modulating oscillator 2. And it's doing it at audio rates, that is to say, super fast, and creating another tone as it does it. Very cool. Yeah. The last thing was sync, right? So if I turn this down, so what is sync? In a nutshell, an oscillator is a cyclic thing. It has a cycle, it has a start, it does something, and it has a shape that finishes, and then it does that again and again and again. And it does it hundreds of times per second, and that's how we get sounds that we hear as pitch, right? So there's a cycle, and that means it's got a start point. And imagine if you have two of these oscillators, their start points might not be exactly in line with each other. They might be drifting slowly. And that's what creates this wonderful, like, beating sound when two oscillators are close together. Like this. In sync, slightly out of sync. They start to beat, and then they beat a lot. And what sync does is it locks them together. In fact, oscillator 2 resets every time oscillator 1 resets. And as you change the pitch of oscillator 2, it no longer changes pitch, it actually changes the tone. It's a thing. And so, the filter. What a filter does is it takes parts of sound away. And as we sweep the filter, we hear how what it is actually doing is cutting off high frequencies. It's like a sort of blanket And the filter that's in the Messenger is a 24 dB per octave 4-pole Moog ladder. With this wonderful sing-song sound, which launched 1,000 mini Moogs. But that has always had a problem, which is you hear there's all this nice bass. And if I turn up the resonance, I get a cool sound, but the bass goes away. So what res bass is a compensation method. When you turn on res bass, I get resonance, but I still get bass as well. So I get this like wicked best of both worlds thing where I can have like squidgy little like classic sounds with lots of resonance, but I get bass. Interestingly, the way that the Messenger does this is different to how I've seen it implemented in other synths. In other synths, quite often drive is employed. So when you increase the resonance, it actually overdrives internally to try and lift the frequencies that are getting lost by the resonance. What happens here is actually there is a bit of clever topology where it takes some of the filter poles and basically mixes it back in post-filter. I think that's what I understood from what I was told by the designers. Basically, it's done in a novel way. It's mixed back in, and it works in other modes, bandpass and high pass as well, for different effects. But what is resonance? Well, resonance is the name for what happens when you accentuate the point that it is cutting off. So, on the knob, everything to the left is kept, everything to the right is discarded. And the resonance is the accentuation at that point. It's a lot of fun. Now that's the trad filter. There is a 2-pole, 12 dB, which is smoother. There's a lot of classic synths that have 24 dB like this, and there's also a lot of classic synths that have 12. It's a gentler curve. Then you have bandpass. What a bandpass is one that only has a bit of where the filter is. Instead of having all the bass or all the highs, it's a bit of where the filter, like, white dot is, with resonance. And then high pass is the opposite of low. It's everything above the white dot, and it cuts out what's below it. And then with resonance, we can accentuate the low frequency. We find it. And we can hit res bass. We get different behavior with res bass on versus off. Whoa. So this is really cool. It's like part of the spirit of the Messenger is this sort of like more aggro. It's a bit cleaner, but with like aggressiveness from res bass, because you've got bass even with in-your-face resonance. Now, before we get to modulation, there's a couple of really important things which add to the color of the filter. And one is this FB Ext in. What this is the output of the mixer is fed back into itself, and this creates a feedback loop. And what feedback loops do is end up creating warmth and drive, but at high settings, they create kind of instability, kind of weirdness and bonkersness. Now, this topology, where it's the mixer back into itself, is different to other Moog synths, where it might be post-filter fed back into itself. Or in the case of the Mini Moog, there was this classic trick where you could take the output of the headphone out, feed it into the external input, and create a loop that way. Actually, some of the like modern mini Moogs had it built in as a loop, but that's not what this is. This is fundamentally different because it's at the output of the mixer. And this was done because it just felt right. When they played around as they were designing it, this just gave an interesting range of additional driven tones. Versus the old school way of doing it. Now, if you want to do it the old school way, you still can. You can take the headphone output and feed it into the Ext input here and create the same type of loop that you get on a mini Moog. Totally doable. But it is nuts. It does all kinds of weird things. Because it's totally dependent on what the mixer and the oscillator section are doing. So that's without. That's with a bit. You can hear it warming up. And then towards the end, weird, odd things happen. Pitches can change. Without. With. Oh, mate. Oh. Yeah. It's nuts. There is some nuttiness to be had in there. Or just subtle drive. What even is that? That's without. Yeah. Bit of noise in there as well. Those of you who are familiar with a concept called no input mixing technique, that's where you feed the output of mixer channels back into themselves, and by adjusting like filter settings and EQ and like volumes, you can create tones. Well, that is a little snifter of that way of working right in the synth. But there is another, even more bonkers control in some respects, which is OSC2 to cutoff. What this does is it takes oscillator 2 and it makes the filter knob be controlled by it. And now in a sec, we're going to look at how envelopes and LFOs move things around, but this is moving things around faster than a hand could control. And it creates more weird tones like FM, because it is indeed a form of FM. So if I turn up... this, that's oscillator 1. Making a bass sound. There you go. But if we turn up OSC2 cutoff, and that oscillator, which is making a sound that is at audio rates, in fact, it is that sound, that's oscillator 2 right now, but we'll make it go away. What we're doing is we're getting oscillator 2 to control the filter, and doing it at audio rates creates textures, especially with resonance. And you might then think, I'll definitely want res bass, won't I? Ooh, that's making my head go funny. What's nice about this weird sound is that because it's being generated by oscillator 2, which is tracking the keyboard, it moves with the keyboard like oscillator 1 does, then it means that the weird sound we make kind of follows the keyboard and stays playable. I really like Filter FM. which is what this is. Let's make oscillator 1 something more audible. That is so cool. Oscillator 2 to cut off is a good time. So that took a little while, but I really want to give you a meaningful examination of each of these features. And now we're going to move on to some other stuff, which is how we push these around and make more animated sounds. It's time for a tea. I've had a tea, and now let's look at modulation. So modulation is the word a synth dork would use to describe using envelopes and LFOs to move things like a virtual hand. Because sounds are interesting when they change over time. We'll get bored if they don't change over time. So envelopes and LFOs and other things that we'll look at will let us do that. Let's look at LFOs first. We have two LFOs, LFO1 and LFO2 here. And what an LFO is the same thing as an oscillator. You may have heard earlier me mentioning that oscillators are cyclic beasts. Well, so are LFOs. They are a cycling shape, going up, down, up, down, up, down, up, down, up, down, like this. In fact, there's even a light that shows you what the up-down is. And you can use that up-down control to move something virtually. Of course, the thing itself doesn't move, but we do hear it, the sound changing like it does. And on the LFO, I have a rate control, which is speed. I have 4 shapes that I can choose from: triangle, saw, falling or rising slowly, moderate or good, and then square wave. That's a bit of a niche British reference for those of you who understand it. And then I have places I can send this wobbling thing, which is the cutoff, the frequency of oscillator 2. Interesting, it's 2, isn't it? Because if you put sync on, then you'll be moving the frequency of oscillator 2, which is something you'll definitely want to do, because sync won't change the pitch, it'll change the timbre, which will be cool. We can change oscillator 1's wave shape and move it and animate it. And that means that we can animate the wave folding, and we can animate the square wave pulse width modulation thing we played with earlier. And we can also do the same thing for the subwave. And this means that we can animate the pulse width modulation of the subwave too. Let's do this. Okay. So here's oscillator 1. Let's pick triangle and let's send it to cutoff by that much. Now the cutoff goes wub. And we are all very satisfied with that wub. We can choose how much it wubs from no wub, positive wub, to negative wub. What does that mean? Well, it means if you look at the knob, if you have sight, the knob for the filter is in the middle position. And if I send positive modulation, it's just like me moving it to the right. And if I send negative modulation, it's just like me moving it to the left. So you have to sort of put the filter in a middle position that you want it to be, and then apply a bit of right bit or bit of right sounds good there. Witness the fitness. Drink 10 pints of bitter. Not quite, but that's the principle. Oh, it's more like wow, wow, wow. Almost getting content ID'd. Hands off, mate. If we were doing oscillator 2's frequency, whoa, we can make dive bombs. Oh, video game dive bombs. But if I put sync on, there. Yes, mate. That's a cool sound. Good times. That's why it's oscillator 2 is the choice, because of sync. And you can do that while combining it with FM. Ah! We can choose the different shapes. That one's whoop, whoop, whoop. And then the old telephone sound. I mean, no one has that as a sound anymore. Actually, I think I do, potentially, on my phone. Anyway, I'm very happy. Such a child. And then the wave shape of oscillator 1. And I think these are like the most significant things, because what it's doing is it's just moving the wave shape dial for us. But because of the way the wave shape has been designed, and pulse width modulation is in the positive direction, and if we go negative, we get a kind of wave-folded sound. Now, what I'm starting to do is like play the keyboard and be like, I kind of want this to like reset. I want it to reset. I want the cycle to begin when I press a key. And that's what the KB reset is for. So that every time I push a key, I get the down cycle. If I don't do that, it can start mid-cycle. So what that's doing is it's resetting like that. And that's interesting because in effect, it makes LFO1 be like an envelope. I haven't told you what envelopes are yet, but you don't have to take my word for it. And then the last thing is subwave, which is where we can change the wave shape of the sub-oscillator. So LFOs animate and push things around in an interesting way. There is a second one. The way it works is that you light up these little lights to tell it which of the three you want it to send to, and you can send it to any combination. And you have to turn this wheel in order to apply it. Cutoff is this, and amp is volume. Or vibrato. Happy days. Envelopes. So an envelope is hard. I find it hard to describe. I've had to describe it to 5-year-olds and adults alike. I always kind of struggle, but I'm going to try. And so an envelope is a shape over time. It's an over time shape. And it has 4 portions in this type of synthesizer. So what happens is you press a key, and as you press a key, it rises in the attack. And then, without you doing anything, it falls with the decay. And then it sustains. And it sustains for as long as you hold the key down. And when you let go of the key, woo, it releases. So You push the key, it attacks, and then it decays, and then it sustains for as long as you hold the key down, and then you let go and it releases. And so this shape can be used for really anything. And we'll look at a second more advanced ways to apply envelopes, but there is a sort of default way that envelopes can be applied. And there are two. They're the exact same thing, but their default routing is different. This bottom one is default routed to the volume. And it's just like me turning the volume knob, but it does a volume knob that's invisible. And then the filter envelope is just the same thing as changing the volume, except it controls that filter. And we don't have to do anything for the amplifier envelope to be applied. It's just applied all the time. But for the filter envelope to be applied, we have to turn the EG amount. And this is where we might start to actually shape these controls. And so at the moment, I'm going to turn the filter envelope off. And to do so, off means it's in the middle position. And what I'll do is I'll turn the release right down. And when I let go, it stops. And when I turn up release, it has a long release. And if I turn up the attack, then it takes a long time to come in. And if I put the attack and the decay in the middle and the sustain down, then it goes and doesn't make any sound because there's no sustain. But if I turn up the sustain a bit, sustaining until I let go. Sustaining until I let go. Do you see? And that's all an envelope is. And so we apply this to stuff. Let's apply it to the filter and good things will happen. But I might want to turn the filter down. And so it's the filter envelope that's making this amazing, curvy, crazy sound because I've got lots of filter envelope applied to the right with this knob, and I've got the filter itself down low because just as we looked at before, what this positive and negative thing is doing to the filter with the LFO, the same is true here. So if I want it to go to the right a lot, then I might want to turn the filter to the left a lot. And if you play around, you start to find all these satisfying positions. If you want a plucky sound, you can do it. You turn most of the stuff down to 0 and then add a bit on. If I want to hear it when I'm holding it down, I turn up sustain. If I don't like what I'm hearing while it's sustaining, I can adjust sustain while I hold it down. Fun. And there's a couple of things in here. Multi-Trig, FN, vel, FN, loop and vel. What is this? So what multi-trig is, if I hold a note and push another note, I don't get that wonderful piao. But if I push multi-trig, totally do. Multi-trig lets you hold a note down, and every note that you play subsequently will reset the envelopes. So it suits a certain type of playing. What FN vel and AN vel are doing, what they will do is change the volume of envelope depending on how hard you hit the key. You get more of a piao if you hit it hard than if you don't. And then looping means that if you hold it down, these envelopes become LFOs. So it's a whole other set of LFOs in effect. You lose your envelopes, but you get 4 LFOs all of a sudden. So looping is a way of turning them into LFOs. One more thing is that we do have the ability to apply envelopes in the oscillator section. The filter envelope has got some default routing here. We can send the filter env to control the oscillator 2's frequency. Which, if we use the sync, is a very cool sound. Turn it off. Or the wave, this thing. That's a good time, isn't it? Flipping heck. And you can do the same thing with the subwave, too. Moving on. Advanced modulation. All right, kid. You're out of school. We've covered basic analog synthesis, and in so doing, what this thing can do. And there is some stuff that I think is not as obvious, and I wanted to book it out into its own little section for that reason. The first thing is that you would not initially realize, but you can actually assign a number of the modulation controls to one other thing. So what I mean is, if you can see on the synth in the LFO1 section, there is a tiny little bracket above the KB reset button, and it says LFO1 assign. And what it means is that I can assign LFO1 to one other thing. Only one thing at once, but one thing. And that's useful. In this sound, I've got the LFO1 moving the sub-oscillator's waveform for me. And I might want that to be on time with the beat. And by the way, that's what the sync button does. Because there's an internal clock on the messenger, or you can send analog or USB or MIDI clock to it, and that will synchronize the movement of the shape to those clocks, and then this LFO rate control becomes a divider. But I've now tied up that LFO. How can I assign it to another thing? Well, the way that I do this is that I hold down this KB reset button until it flashes. And now it's flashing to say it's in assign mode. And then what I do is I turn any of the parameters that I want to modulate. And I think most of these are fair game. But let's try cutoff. So what I do is I hold it till it winks, and then I turn the cutoff dial. Now what happens is that the buttons from 1 to 16 become a sort of positive or negative indicator. The spot between 8 and 9 is the center. And as I move this control, I am in fact choosing the amount that I am going to positively modulate the filter with, or go the other way, and it's the amount I'm going to negatively modulate the filter with it. So let's turn up positive, a fair whack, so we hear it. And we can either push this button or wait. Oh. So that's LFO1 modulating two things for our money. It's modulating the subwave, and it's also modulating the filter by that degree. Oh, nice. Oh, it's a lovely kind of unification. Oh. So then I want to like push the filter more. I've applied LFO2 cutoff to it. What about a bit of feedback? Oh, that's a thing that just happened. So that's what we did. We held down the button for a while, and then we turned the dial, and then that's the way of positively or negatively affecting the thing. If you want to change it, by the way, you just make the modulation again, hold it down, and turn something else. You might want to maybe have like the release time be controlled by it. That'd be good, wouldn't it? Now, there are other things that you can assign to multiple things, and they are the envelopes. So filter envelope can be assigned by holding down this button. The amplifier envelope can also be assigned to one other thing by holding down this button and doing it. I don't think you can send LFO2 to another destination. I'm sorry about that. But to make up for it, I have some other secret modulation things. Did you see this? Did you? Did you? Well, friend, this is KBS+H. And this is a feature that I personally really, really love. In fact, I really do. I really love this. This is my favorite thing on synths. And what this is it's a random value that is created every time a key is pushed. Every time a key is pushed, invisibly, a random value is getting made. And this is where I get to send it to something. Let's init the sound. We hold this down. Something that the Boards of Canada chaps would really enjoy. All right, with a bit of feedback, they definitely have feedback on it. So then this KBS+H is in this kind of advanced section. If we push this settings button, we can access all of these settings. Now there's a bunch of ones that we'll get to, but I'm going to hold KBS+H, hold it down, hold it down. Now I can apply KBS+H by turning the thing I want to apply it to. Let's apply it to the filter quite a lot. And we can just wait and it will return. There you go. Good times. Can you hear what's happening? It's changing it on a per step basis. And if I hold down KBS+H again and just make it a little bit, just so it's moving the filter a little bit. I think that's the secret of these sorts of things. Just a little bit of movement is good. So that's sort of advanced. You can send the LFOs and the envelopes to one other thing. You get to choose one thing, and you can also send this KBS+H. We also have velocity, aftertouch, and expression as an option here. Now, what velocity is how hard I hit the keys, so I can use that value and send that to control something in the same way. And what aftertouch is when you push a key down harder, you get this extra value. I think that's worth just trying. I'll go to KBS+H, and I'll turn this down. Then I'll go to Aftertouch, and I'll turn this up. here's an interesting, that's quite cool, by the way, but here's an interesting thing that we could send it to. Why don't we hold it down? Hold it down. Another copyright strike. Hold it down. Hold it down. And then we'll apply it to noise. So now the onset, if I push hard into it, has got like a noise applied. Very cool. I also forgot one, which is KB assign. KB assign is the position of the keyboard as well. So if you want it so that, you know, depending if you play high on the keyboard, then there's a different wave shape, then that's here. You know, you play low on the keyboard, the wave shape's in one position. You play high in the keyboard, the wave shape's in another. Very cool. However, there is expression. And what expression is the expression input on the back of the synth. Here. There. I know I don't know if you're thinking what I'm thinking, but what I'm thinking is, can I put control voltage into the expression input? That's a reasonable thing to think, and I just so happen to be flanked by the correct cable to try that right now in front of you. And I've not done this, actually, but I did speak to one of the designers who spoke to the electrical engineers and was like, it should work. It should basically accept, I think he said plus or minus 5 volts. Here we go. I should say this in an American accent, but I won't. The expression input will support bipolar modulation in the range of -5 to +5 with a CV. For unipolar modulation, the range is 0 to 5 volts. So yes, we should be able to send CV in to control it. And we'll do it, and so I will feed that into there. And I will run my DFAM, which you should always do. And then I will plug the output of my DFAM's sequencer into it. Lord, that took a while. Here we go. Flip Nora. So then I'll go to Settings, Expression, and I'll turn up the filter control. Yes, mate. Oh, that's really rather good. Oh, yeah. Very cool. So suddenly we can animate the thing using external CV. It can do it. Now, speaking of animation, the arpeggiator. So the arpeggiator is, I think, in my opinion, more of a sequencer than I've seen in other synthesizers, which is to say that it's very interactive. And because of its interactivity, the ability to like turn notes on and off and change the pattern on the fly, like it is more sequencer-like. It's fun. So I'll try and go through all of it. The way to play the ARP is push the ARP button and push the play button. So we play the ARP. And we can change the tempo with the dial. But if we hold a chord and push hold, we can let go. Hold holds those notes down. And then we can just interact with both hands. Now, in terms of the things that we can do on the ARP, the key one is staring us right in the face. These 16 buttons are 16 spots that we can turn on or off. And we can use this to change the pattern. There is also a setting that you can activate in the config page that lets you change whether notes are muted or skipped, depending on where you activate them. As in, it depends whether it'll like hold the sequence at that point and then advance ahead, or just actually miss out these steps, if that makes sense. Yeah. So we can see that we can turn notes on and off to kind of jumble up sequences in interesting ways. Now there are two modes, which I didn't mention. And the one that we're in at the moment is called random. So it's going to play the notes kind of randomly depending on what I selected. But then there is also pattern. Which plays a pattern. And then obviously we can interact with the gate pattern at the same time. Then there's two other things that we can mess with in pattern, and that's the pattern and the oct. Now, what the pattern does is it is one of 13 different patterns. Up, down, played in order, non-serial, random, leap, frog, up 2, -1, leapfrog, down 2, +1, inner, outer, pedal tones. I'm not going to explain them all, except to say you push settings and art pattern, and now I can pick anything from 1 to 13. Up, down. So by choosing different patterns, we can change how notes are being played in the sequence. So in this sense, it's really interactive. Like, it's very fun to be able to mess with this. And the other thing is the oct. So there are a bunch of different octs from 1 to 10 at present. Number 8, for example, randomly assigns the note to be in the current octave or one above. You can hear it's like going up and down. And here's a really cool trick. You can use the tempo dial to adjust the value that you are adjusting. So I'm able to use the tempo dial to change which of the 1 to 10 modes I'm on. I could just do this, but I could also just squiz the tempo dial. So I think this is really interesting, like the ability to basically interact with the octaves and to have all these different modes, so it jumps up and down octaves in really interesting ways, combined with the ability to jumble up the pattern without you having to even change the notes, which you can also do at the same time. You can just like hit some keys and you've got a new melody. Change the pattern, you've got a new melody. Change the octave, you can have a new melody. But you can return to the previous one. Six and 8 were nice there, weren't they? Up. Leapfrog up 2, down 1. Yeah. Do you see what I mean? Like, you can squiz the tempo dial when you're in art pattern or oct to hop between things. And that really jumbles up the pattern in a way that is super useful and satisfying when you're actually like live improvising with arpeggios. I haven't seen that in another synth. It's really, really well thought out. So, respect. But the last thing is the sequencer. Making sequences. So in the sequencer, we have the ability to record up to 64 steps, and we also have the ability to record a single lane of automation. And on a per step basis, we can change one value of something. And they can be different things per step, but they can only be one thing in each step. We also have like note probability in the note pool, which is a way that we can have on a per step basis a probability that a note will be chosen and put in place of the one we've recorded from a pool of notes that we determine. And we can also change the probability that a note will happen, that's gate prob, as well as the length of notes, the swing, and the length of the sequence. Okay, so here's our sound from before. So to sequence, I have to come over to the direction dial and set it to SEQ. So now I'm in sequencer mode. If I hit record, and then hit play, it's really low on the keyboard. So if I come up, then the sequence plays as long as play is played, and it matters which key I touch. I can transpose the sequence there. So like before, with the arpeggiator, we can turn notes on and off. And if we push settings and go to length, then what we can do is we can change the length of the sequence. Right now, the sequence is like 7 steps, I think. And I'm looking at steps 1 to 16. If I adjust this little dial, I can look at steps 17 to 32 and so on like this. And if I push a step, now, by pushing this last one, I've made the sequence 16 steps long because I'm in 16 here. I could push here. Now the sequence is 32 steps long. So now I've got this like blank space, right? If I hit record, I can dub notes in. And if there's something in one of those spaces, it'll overwrite it. So in this way, we can like write some notes to start with, leave some space, and add things in by just playing them when I feel they need to happen. Another thing we can do is I can hold a step and choose a note. Not that one. How about that one? Yes. So what I was doing is I'm holding a step and pushing a key, and I can go up and down the keyboard. Yeah. So in this sense, like the sequencer can be very deliberate, or you can feel things out. That's how I like to work. I like to kind of hybridize the two, quite frankly. And I definitely am not always sure what note I want to play, so I like being able to push it and then feel the note in. You can keep trying different notes till you find the right one for that step. The other thing you can do, if you hold settings and go back to length, and I'll move to 16 and push step 3. So we've got a nice short sequence here, which is very groovy. But I haven't deleted the things that I'm not hearing. If I move to 32, so it's not destructive. I can shorten the sequence and not lose the things that were cut out. Now, what is note probability and the note pool, as well as the gate probability? The best thing to do first is put some notes in the pool. So if I have settings pressed, I push note pool, And now I have to play up to 16 notes. And let's say I want it to be more likely that that note will be played. I can play it multiple times to increase its statistical probability that it will occur. So what I did was I've recorded 16 notes. So now the note pool is full of notes. Now if I go to note probability, I see with these like dimly lit steps where there is sequence information. And if I pick the first one and turn the tempo dial up, do you hear that? Oh, it's the same thing again. I guess it was statistically probable. Okay, so what I just did was I picked a step and turned the tempo dial, and that chooses the probability that a note will be taken from the pool and inserted once in that location. And I can pick other slots. I could pick all of the slots if I wanted. Super cool, that. Take it away, we're back to the old sequence. I love that it's revertible. Same thing with the arpeggiator. You're not doing destructive things by changing the arp pattern and the arp oct, nor are you doing destructive things with note prob. Now going to be a totally random sequence, but drawn from a pool of notes that I chose. Really cool, really cool. That is really cool. Because it's sort of generative, but it's also highly customizable and constrainable. And then the other thing is gate probability. What's the probability that a note will occur? And here you can pick a note and dial down the amount. The sequence gets more sparse. So I'm choosing what goes in the pool. Really cool. That to me is like, yeah, a real like clever design where through a very simple thing, generatively iterate on notes and have a pool of notes that could be outside those or variants of them, and it will choose probabilistically. You know, you determine what notes can be selected from, the likelihood, and what steps that happens on. So the final piece of the sequence of puzzle is this thing that they call parameter recording. Other people can call it parameter locking. What it means is that on a per step basis, you can have a value change. So what you might use this for is to kind of hand sequence elements so that the tone changes on a per step basis. And this makes the sound come alive. So if I've got a sequence, which I do, then what I can do is hold down this button here. And when this winks, we are now able to Param Rec. And so the way that I might do this is I hold down a step and I change the value that I want to change on that step. If I hold this down, then I'm changing the oscillator to frequency. And then on maybe this step 9, I want to do something a bit drastic. Let's hold down 9 and turn up the noise control. Let's put it there. So this is really interesting. What I'm actually doing here is on each step, I can have one value change. They can be completely different values, but it's just one thing. And so in this way, I'm able to build these really quite complex sequences. And I can still interact with the controls, which are being modulated. And I believe it adds what the voltage that is being created in the sequencer, it adds that to the control, so you can sort of still interact with the control. It doesn't sort of overwrite the control. Really cool. So this means on a per step basis, I can change one thing at a time for every step that the sequencer has. Very cool. And I can also come in here and turn these on and off if I wish. And again, I can touch them and overwrite them. Yeah, spend some time and freak it out, you know? Spend some time and craft a sequence that is interesting to you. The capability is there. So Messenger is not just this simplistic looking synthesizer. It can do some really grown up things. And I want to thank Moog for having me do this. And thank you for spending the time. More videos below. And thanks.